Virginia is home to 22 different units of the national park system, surpassed in number only by California, New York, and Washington, D.C. Shenandoah is, of course, the most well-known, but there is an abundance of historic sites, battlefields, and downright weird administrative anomalies at home in the Old Dominion as well. In this video, we're going to dive into each of these sites and give you the full breakdown on each of Virginia's 22 national park sites. All right, first off, before we get into them, I just have to mention that the administrative breakdown of Virginia's NPS sites is complicated. There are officially 22 units of the national park system in Virginia, like I mentioned, but given the proximity to Washington, D.C., the capital of administrative weirdness in the United States, there are several sites and locations under NPS jurisdiction or that they are involved with in some capacity, but are not officially official parts of the national park system. It's weird, it's complicated. I don't make the rules, I just tell you what I know. So we're only considering the 22 official units of the national park system located in Virginia for this video. Also, if you need a refresher on the different types of national parks in the US, national historic sites, national monuments, national seashores, all that sort of stuff, I have a whole video on them. I will link it down in the description below. All right, I think we'll go in alphabetical order for these just to simplify things a little bit. So we'll start with the Appalachian National Scenic Trail. You've probably heard of this one, and yes, it's technically an official part of the national park system. Winding more than 2,000 miles across 14 different states, this is America's premier long-distance trail. Of those 2,000 plus miles, Virginia is home to 544 of them, the most of any state, a large chunk of which actually goes through Shenandoah National Park. Next on the list is Appomattos Courthouse National Historical Park. Again, a name you might recognize from your history class, but maybe you didn't know it was a national park site. This park protects the site where, on April 9th, 1865, Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered to Union General Ulysses S. Grant, ending the American Civil War. Fun fact too, Appomattox Courthouse isn't actually a courthouse at all. That was simply the name of the village where the battle took place. The actual surrender itself took place in a nearby farmhouse called the McLean House, which was restored in 1949 and which you can still visit today. Both Grant and Lee do have their own national park sites dedicated to them, but only one of them is in Virginia. The next site on this list is Arlington House, the Robert E. Lee Memorial. Located entirely within Arlington National Cemetery and preserving the former plantation home of Robert E. Lee, this is the United States' official memorial dedicated to the Confederate general. This fact has drawn controversy given Lee's role with the Confederacy and his ownership of slaves. There is currently a campaign to rename the site simply to Arlington House National Historic Site and dropping Lee's name from the title. The main argument here is that Lee's history and role at the property should still be interpreted because they are still important to American history, but the site can do so without memorializing and celebrating his actions. Next, we move to Assateague Island National Seashore, which is actually split between Virginia and Maryland. Also, most of the park is actually in Maryland, so I'll go into it in more detail then. The Blue Ridge Parkway is an official part of the national park system. Again, you've probably heard of it, but maybe you didn't know it was a national park site. Common theme here. The Blue Ridge Parkway is a linear park focusing on a scenic driving experience. It crosses hundreds of miles of the Blue Ridge Mountains between Virginia and North Carolina, and is one of the most popular national park sites in America, seeing just under 17 million visitors last year. Of the parkway's 469 miles, 216 of them are in Virginia. The Booker T. Washington National Monument protects the location where the famous African-American educator and leader was born into slavery in 1856. After being freed during the Civil War, Washington went on to earn a college degree, serve as the first leader of the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama, and became one of the most influential African-American leaders and orators in American history. This site interprets his life, career, and accomplishments. Next up is Cedar Creek and Belle Grove National Historical Park. This park is kind of a hodgepodge of historical interpretation themes, from backcountry colonial history to being an important early agricultural area centered on wheat production to what is probably its main reason for being protected in the first place. It was the site of an American Civil War battle. Most of the land within the park, though, is still privately owned, actually, and you can't have access to it, including most of the battlefield. And the land the Park Service does own is mainly administered by partner organizations to the National Park Service. Colonial National Historical Park preserves and interprets the history of the famous site of Jamestown, the first ever permanent English settlement in North America, all the way back in 1607. The park is administratively complicated, a common theme for Virginia parks. It comprises three main areas: the historic Jamestown itself, like I mentioned, but then there's also the pivotal Revolutionary War battlefield of Yorktown, which is preserved as part of this park as well, and the Scenic Colonial Parkway, which actually connects those two sites together, so those three areas together. Cumberland Gap National Historical Park is yet another park that Virginia shares with its neighbors. In this case, the park is split right at the tri-point border with Kentucky and Tennessee and protects the famous Cumberland Gap, one of the first great routes over the Appalachian Mountains in the early history of the United States. It's mostly in Kentucky though, so we'll cover it in more detail then. Fort Monroe National Monument is located at a critical strategic entrance to the Chesapeake Bay. Its defensive responsibilities date all the way back to the early 1600s, but of course were later adapted and evolved over the course of its lifetime before being transferred to the Park Service in 2011. It was, by area, the largest defensive fortification ever constructed in the United States. It remained under Union control throughout the entirety of the Civil War and became known as Freedom's Fortress after more than 10,000 enslaved African Americans escaped here during the war. Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania National Historical Park protects a collection of crucial Civil War battlefields, namely the battles of Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania, of course, but also the Battle of Chancellorsville and the Battle of the Wilderness. Together, these battles were some of the most crucial and consequential of the entire Civil War. 85,000 men were wounded and more than 15,000 were killed across these four battles. The George Washington Memorial Parkway is another site focused on scenic driving, and it's another linear park as well. Although its location in the DC suburbs has meant that the site has really become more of a major commuter route than a pleasure driving experience at this point. Still though, the parkway does connect several major attractions and installations along the Potomac River. For instance, if you've ever been to the Virginia side of the Great Falls, despite not being its own NPS unit, that is an NPS administered area which falls under the jurisdiction of the George Washington Memorial Parkway. Even though it's not actually even located anywhere near the parkway, I warned you, the closer you get to DC, the weirder the administrative arrangements get. George Washington does have another park dedicated to him in Virginia though, the George Washington Birthplace National Monument. This site is basically the George Washington Park in the United States. It is set up to protect and interpret his life, accomplishments, and role in American history. Obviously, G-Dubs is most famous for being the first American president, but at this site, you can also learn more about his early life and what led him to that fateful path in the first place. The park is mainly centered around the memorial, where the visitor center is, where the replica house is, and where the farm are. But there are also some really beautiful nature trails where you can take a nice, lovely stroll along the Potomac River. Harpers Ferry National Historical Park is yet another site that Virginia shares with its neighbors, this time Maryland and West Virginia, the latter of which has by far the majority of the land and attractions associated with this site, so we'll talk about it then. Maggie L Walker National Historic Site is located in Richmond, Virginia. A lesser-known site dedicated to a lesser-known individual, yes, but still no less significant in the course of American history. Maggie L Walker was one of the foremost civil rights leaders of her time, advocating not only for civil rights, but also educational and economic opportunities for newly freed African Americans in the Jim Crow South. Her life and career were really quite remarkable and incredibly diverse. She served as a teacher, the leader of a fraternal order, the Independent Order of St. Luke, a newspaper publisher, and a bank president, the first African American woman in history to do so. She was also involved with numerous community organizations, including the NAACP and the Council of Colored Women, which she helped found. Her home is now open for tours as part of the national park system. Manassas National Battlefield Park is yet another Civil War battlefield site. Much of the war was fought in Virginia, so it has a lot of sites dedicated to it. Many of these are part of the park system, some of which we've seen, but some are not. Manassas National Battlefield Park protects the location of the first and second battles of Manassas, also known as the Battles of Bull Run. The first battle was very early on in the war. It was basically like the first major engagement between the two armies, and both sides suffered significant casualties, signaling to both of them that the war would not see a swift end as had previously been predicted. Just over a year later, the second battle took place here, a Confederate victory which saw them reach the height of their power and precipitated Robert E. Lee's ensuing Maryland campaign. In that same vein, another Civil War site is Petersburg National Battlefield. Taking place over 292 days, the Siege of Petersburg is considered to be the longest military action undertaken during the entire Civil War, resulting in more than 70,000 casualties. Less a traditional siege and more a series of battles that took place around the town of Petersburg, the ultimate result of the battle was Robert E. Lee's retreat from the area and his eventual surrender at Appomattox Courthouse. Because of the spread out nature of the battle, in terms of preservation, and you'll actually find this kind of across the board at a lot of battlefield sites actually, there's less a single site and more a collection of sites and areas that were important to the battle. They often require driving between the various locations and are spread out and interspersed among pockets of private land. Basically, you need to travel and drive between these places to understand like the full scale of events that took place at sites like this one. Potomac Heritage National Scenic Trail is another linear park, although it is a lot different from something like the Appalachian National Scenic Trail. They happen to carry the same designation, yes, but are very, very different from each other, stretching all the way from Pennsylvania down through Maryland and DC before ultimately traversing the banks of the Potomac in Virginia. The gist of this park is essentially to preserve and interpret the Potomac River's place and importance in American history. Administratively, this is a really, really weird one, guys. So again, Virginia is just chock full of this stuff. This trail is technically made up of a series of other trails, so it's basically a trails within a trail. Got the Great Allegheny Passage, the C&O Canal, the Mount Vernon Trail, and a bunch of others. Some of these are their own NPS units themselves, like the C&O, so you've got overlays there. It's kind of a mess. The two segments of the trail that are in Virginia are the Northern Virginia Trail and the Northern Neck of Virginia Trail. I can't with this. We're moving on to another administratively complicated park, Prince William Forest Park. You will notice that this park doesn't carry a national designation of any kind, like we've been talking about for the entirety of this video so far. And that's because the park wasn't originally supposed to be part of the national park system at all. Originally, it was developed by the Civilian Conservation Corps and was supposed to be turned into a state park, but then we started training spies here during World War II, and it kind of just stayed under federal control instead. Catoctin Mountain Park in Maryland is like this as well, which I have a whole video on if you want to learn more about this program. The final Civil War battlefield site that we're going to talk about in this video is Richmond National Battlefield Park, centered, of course, around the city of Richmond. Again, this is less one site and more a collection of sites in and around Richmond, which basically interprets the entire history of the city during the Civil War. This site protects, of course, battlefields, but also former hospitals and ironworks and historic houses. According to the Park Service, quote, Richmond's fate would determine America's future, end quote, indicating just how important these places and this city at that time were to American history. And then the park you've all been waiting for, Shenandoah, Virginia's only capital N, capital P national park. Shenandoah is one of the East Coast's premier national parks. It protects a long, skinny portion of the ridgetops of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Its defining attraction is, of course, Skyline Drive, a 105-mile scenic road traversing the park from top to bottom. Southern Appalachian scenery abounds here at numerous overlooks and pullouts, but you'll also find views down into the pastoral, bucolic farmlands of the Shenandoah Valley as well. Shenandoah actually has a bit of a troubled history, though, in terms of its creation, which involved the displacement of many farming families, and then essentially trying to give the impression that this place was a pristine wilderness area that nobody ever lived in. I have a whole video on it if you're interested. And now to our final Virginia entry. For this one, we've saved one of the most unique national park sites of them all, Wolf Trap National Park for the Performing Arts. This is the only NPS site in the country dedicated to the performing arts. Wolf Trap hosts numerous concerts, plays, and performances, all with the goal of celebrating and interpreting the arts. The centerpiece of the park is the Feline Center, a huge, beautiful wooden construction that plays host to all of those aforementioned performances. It's a fantastic venue that I highly recommend you take the time to see. The park is actually run as a partnership, though, between the National Park Service and the Wolf Trap Foundation. The NPS oversees the land management and interpretive aspect of things, while the Wolf Trap Foundation oversees all of the performances. I was invited there on behalf of the Wolf Trap Foundation last year. I got to see Railroad Earth. It was a really cool experience, and I actually have a whole video about that experience and this unique park if you'd like to learn more. Okay. That's all for this one, folks. Virginia, a lot of national park sites here, but some really important ones. Sites dedicated to the earliest beginnings of America, sites dedicated to our darkest moments and our most important leaders, sites celebrating our natural beauty. Virginia has played host to some really important moments in American history, and its park units are certainly a reflection of that. Let me know in the comments if you've been to any of these and which one is your favorite. Now, if you've been keeping up with this series, you'll know that I started it on shorts, but I've now decided to take it long form because I just want to, and I think it makes more sense, and I'm trying to be a little bit more consistent with my uploads. Videos like this one allow me to do that while still working on the more detailed explainers. So look forward to more videos like this one. Direct support on Patreon is always appreciated, helps me keep this whole ship afloat, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.